Hello, I'm Laura McInerney, co-founder of Teacher Tapp, the app that asks thousands of teachers 3 daily questions so you can find out what's really going on the ground in schools. We've teamed up with the guys from InnerDrive to bring you InnerTapp, where we look at what teachers are thinking and what the research is saying about key topics in education. Today, we're tackling one of education's biggest conundrums, marking. Let's start with a simple question. Does marking actually improve pupil learning? According to teachers, mostly no. We asked teachers if the comments they write into students' books were making a difference. The majority said no. No matter how much they mark, they don't believe it changes how much learning actually takes place. But it isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. Maths teachers are the most sceptical about written comments, with 2/3 strongly believing it has no impact on student learning. While in English, it's more mixed. There, only 28% strongly felt that giving comments wasn't helping. The difference might be down to the different nature of these subjects. Maths involves clearly right and wrong answers, which students logically work through, and mathematicians can communicate by showing different examples of the questions rather than wordy explanations. On the other hand, English teachers are more likely to enjoy writing out words, given that it's a core part of their subject, and they also feel they're modelling good writing when they do this, hence why they might feel it's more useful. Age of the pupils involved also matters. Teachers who work in the early years and Key Stage 1 think that comments are less effective than those who work in Key Stage 2 and upwards. Given that younger students are less able to read or interpret the comments, that makes sense. But how often do school marking policies actually take these nuances into consideration? Here's where it gets spicy. First, when we asked if schools specify how often books should be marked, the vote was split. 51-49, half said yes roughly, half said no. So while marking policies might mention things like what colour pen you can write in, the frequency that you must mark is not as common in marking policies as you might think. However, if we look even more closely, classroom teachers are more likely to say their school has a specific marking frequency in its policy than head teachers. 52% of teachers say they're told how often they must mark books, but only 32% of head teachers agree. So either heads don't know what's in their own policies, or teachers feel pressure that doesn't officially exist. This discrepancy doesn't just occur for how often teachers must mark books, it's also in how they must mark them. 46% of classroom teachers say they're expected to write comments in children's books according to their school's marking policies, yet only 29% of head teachers say the same. Let's think next about time. Teachers often say they have a lot of marking, but exactly how much time and who is spending it marking every week? Well, surprise, surprise, it's the English teachers again, and the Key Stage 2 primary teachers. 60% of them say they need to mark for 3 or more hours every week just to keep up. Contrast that with early years, Key Stage 1 and secondary maths teachers. About 30% of them can get the job done in under an hour, probably because maths is easier to automate, and there is fewer words in comments for Key Stage 1 students. These are fairly consistent findings across many, many years of asking, to the point that we've sometimes even asked if maths teachers ought to run more extracurricular clubs to even up the hours. Funnily enough, the maths teachers are not as keen on that idea. On this topic, there's also some rare good news. Since 2020, the number of teachers spending 5 or more hours a week marking has dropped significantly. Primary teachers have gone from 36% doing that down to 24%, and secondary teachers from 27% down to 17%. Even better, twice as many teachers now spend less than an hour a week marking compared to 2020. Technology is likely a factor here. Online homework tools are doing some heavy lifting, and with more transcription and AI software available, we do expect this trend to continue. Here's a twist though. When we asked who actually wishes they could spend more time marking, first up, no one says it's their favourite part of the job when given a range of options, and almost no one says they'd like to up their time marking. Just 5% of primary school teachers agreed. In secondary schools, that number was a little bit higher at 15%, and who was leading the pack? Modern foreign language teachers. Perhaps if their students write more, it shows they have learned more. It does have quite a large effect on workload. On any given day, around 40% of Teacher Tappers say they marked books in front of the television or streaming networks these days, and 5% are still marking even after 10 p.m. Plus, almost 3/4 of primary and secondary English teachers are doing at least some marking every single day of the week. Much of the workload is self-imposed though. Not only are policies likely not saying that marking must be done every day, but even when we ask teachers to imagine a hypothetical world in which no one is judging their marking, not leaders, not Ofsted, not parents, then around half of them still say they would continue to mark as much as they do, even if they had marked for 10+ hours in the previous week. So, now over to InnerDrive's Bradley Bush to highlight what the research says about marking and how we can give more meaningful feedback to students.
People often confuse marking with feedback. Feedback can take several forms, such as written or verbal, and it can be done on students' written work, their presentation, or other forms. Therefore, written marking by teachers is only one type of feedback. Although there has been much more research into feedback as a general concept, there actually hasn't been a fortune on written marking. In terms of written marking, the Education Endowment Foundation found a limited amount of high-quality, large-scale studies. Overall, they found that grading every single piece of work had limited effectiveness. Likewise, if there isn't much time and space given to students to be able to reflect and action on that marked work, it's unlikely it will lead to any real significant change. When it comes to feedback in general, there has been a lot more research on the topic. If delivered effectively, feedback is one of our very best bets to accelerate student learning. And yet, evidence suggests that just over a third of the time, feedback actually hinders learning. This has led to researchers calling it a double-edged sword. This chimes with recent research that found that 20% of people did not change a single thing to their work after getting feedback on it. And those that did make any changes, 47% of them made no improvement. So why does feedback sometimes help, and why does sometimes it hinder? Perhaps part of the answer can be found in one of the most interesting studies in this area by researchers Hattie and Timperley. In it, they outlined 4 different types of feedback. 1. Feedback about the person. This type of feedback is personal and often leads to labels like, "you are so smart." Research suggests that personal feedback doesn't really encourage student engagement, goal setting, or understanding about the task, and generally isn't very effective at enhancing student learning. 2. Feedback about the task. This is where the feedback is focused on whether the task was done successfully or not. This is the most common type of feedback, and it can be effective when used in the right context, which is when students may have misunderstood a concept. The problem with it though, is it tends not to be very generalisable. 3. Feedback about the process. This type of feedback focuses on the decisions, strategies and techniques students use during a task. It's about whether students have actually understood and improved a concept or idea and can be highly effective for enhancing deeper learning. 4. Feedback about self-regulation. Feedback about self-regulation addresses the way that students monitor, direct and regulate their behaviour when they are learning. The bottom 2, feedback about the process and feedback about self-regulation, are often desirable, as this can lead to deeper and longer lasting learning. The aforementioned study by Hattie and Timperley also emphasised that for feedback to be really effective, it should answer 3 questions for students. These questions are 1. Where am I going? This starts with the end in mind and helps provide clarity and focus on what the students are working towards. The second question is how am I going? This helps remind students of how much progress they have made, which is a really good source of motivation, as well as prompting them to reflect on the strategies they are using, which is a cornerstone of developing metacognition. The third and final question is arguably the most important, which is where to next? For feedback to be effective, students should have a clear understanding of what they need to do next. By answering this question, it helps reduce the chance of feedback being vague and abstract, and instead helps it become concrete and actionable. As mentioned earlier, feedback, if delivered well, is one of our best chances to accelerate learning, but often it doesn't have the desired effect. As a result, it has the power to help or hinder learning. The challenge, therefore, isn't simply giving more feedback, but giving better feedback. By carefully considering the type of feedback, as well as making it as actionable as possible, we give ourselves the best chance that our feedback will land well and make the difference we hope it will.
So where does this leave us? Teachers are spending less time marking than they used to, but many still question its actual impact. There's a clear mismatch between what classroom teachers believe they're expected to do and what heads think their policies say. But just because teachers believe these things about marking doesn't mean it's what the best research says we should do. By focusing on process-based feedback and key actionable steps, we increase the chance of student learning.